So there's been a ton of talk about bulking online recently, so I thought I would throw in my own 2 cents. By the title of this video, you can probably gauge a little bit of my opinion, but I'd first like to establish and get clear in my terms. What I mean by bulking is getting consistently heavier with the objective of gaining muscle in the gym, but the primary directive is weight gain. So setting weight goals instead of visual goals, measurement goals, or performance goals in the gym, that's what I consider bulking. Obviously there's nuances. There's dirty bulking where you're not too worried about the size of the surplus or the foods that you're eating, and then there's lean or clean bulking where you're keeping the surplus to a rate where you're gaining around 0.5 pound to 1 pound per week and you're trying to prioritize whole foods. Most people are chasing an arbitrary weight goal. Muscle gain is not weight dependent, it's not caloric surplus dependent. Muscle gain is a signaling dependent process. What that means is if you add a bunch of food into someone's diet, you increase them into a caloric surplus and change nothing else, that would be what we call a nutrition alteration. And that would cause lots of weight gain, but likely zero muscle gain or nearly zero muscle gain. If you let someone's calories stay where they are, and the only thing that you changed is their lifestyle, so you implemented training, they would gain muscle. They would lose body fat and gain muscle mass. That brings me to my next point. If you're over 15% body fat, you can stay at your current body weight and build plenty of muscle dependably for long periods of time. And most people are 15% body fat or above. I'll show an example of 15% body fat so you can get an idea of what exactly I'm talking about. Most people assume that they are leaner than they really are. Generally, a good rule is to take whatever you think that your body fat percent is and add 3 to 5%. That'll probably be more accurate. Another thing to remember in that same vein is that muscle gain is really slow. Unless you're an absolute beginner, which even then it's not very quick. You can expect to gain roughly 10 to 20 pounds of muscle in your first year of consistent training, and many people won't even gain that much. 10 pounds is more normal. 20 pounds would be a really great response. My next point in that same vein is that it shifts the emphasis, the primary focus of your fitness from training onto nutrition. And nutrition is super important for health and body weight, but it is not super relevant to your muscle gain. Now, I'm gonna add a couple of nuances here. You need to be eating enough protein, you can't be starving yourself, and you also need to make sure that you're getting in all of your necessary nutrients to build muscle properly. However, I'm talking about calories. Like I said earlier, muscle growth is a signaling dependent, not a nutrition dependent process. Therefore, your primary focus should be on your training when your goal is to build muscle rather than your nutrition. Within nutrition, the thing that should have your primary focus, if the goal is muscle gain, is protein intake. Most people who are bulking are eating enough protein anyway, so that's not something that I'm really going to go over. You don't need to be in a caloric surplus to gain muscle. That's something that I think either people don't know or they've been misinformed on. The majority of people are not so lean that they need to introduce more food to gain muscle. At any given moment, you have a bank of stored energy on your body. Your body fat exists for the purpose of being utilized when there is not enough food present. If your training is progressing, you will build muscle. Adding in more food can help you build more muscle, but it will not guarantee it, and it isn't the thing driving that muscle growth. Some people will get the two things conflated because they add more food and they see themselves getting bigger. This can happen for two reasons. The first thing can be that you actually are building muscle, but you're positing that that is a result of the increase in food, not the training. Your training can benefit from an increase in food. That's what will lead to you building more muscle. So if you were under fueling and you started fueling adequately and that allowed you to train harder, train for longer, train more consistently, or have better recovery, that will result in better muscle growth. However, you may see yourself getting bigger. This is option 2, and it's what I see way more often. You see yourself getting bigger because you're gaining body fat and you can't tell the difference immediately. You're filling out your clothes better, you see your arms getting bigger, and you can't tell that the increase is coming from stored fat rather than muscle. This is important to remember because another reason that bulking isn't necessary for most people is that leanness, so losing body fat, will have a more visual impact than building more muscle, given that you're not already very lean. So if you're already very lean, getting leaner isn't going to make a huge difference. But if you're 15+% body fat, it will be significantly more noticeable on your physique to lose body fat than it will be to build muscle. So those are the reasons why you probably don't need to bulk. In the title I said, but I did. So here are the reasons that I did need to bulk. When I started my first bulk, I'll throw up a picture of my starting point. That was summer of 2023. I was between 108 and 110 pounds at 5'2", around 10% body fat, maybe a little bit leaner. I was experiencing lots of hunger, mood swings, and generally bad mood, body image problems, a lack of consistent muscle gain. I couldn't go out with friends very frequently because I was trying to maintain such a lean composition, and there was no reason for me to continue maintaining that excessive leanness. I wasn't competing and I wasn't doing a photo shoot. I was simply doing it because I liked the look and I didn't want to let go of it, and I had really low body weight. So if your body weight is really low, no amount of main gaining, which is maintaining your body weight and trying to build muscle, is going to save you. I was never going to main gain my way from 110 pounds lean to 130 pounds lean. So I needed to bulk for those reasons. However, the primary reason that I bulked was actually psychological. I eventually developed a restrictive eating disorder. This was because I saw the benefits of my leanness and tried to maintain and further them for an extended period of time at the expense of my general well-being and mental health. I maintained that body composition on and off for close to a year and a half leading up to that point. I started a diet at close to that body composition that only lasted a month but got me even leaner. And I was hungry most of the time going into that diet. By the time I finished it, I experienced excessive hunger signaling for months, even after introducing more food. So I destroyed my hormonal balance of my hunger and fullness hormones. So ghrelin is your hunger hormone. That's what signals to your body that you need to eat because you haven't eaten enough or you're too lean to sustain your body's natural functions. Your body thinks that you're starving, so it increases ghrelin production. This is natural during a diet, but generally speaking, once you stop that diet and you increase your food, the ghrelin production will go down and your leptin production, which is the fullness hormone, will increase again. However, if you've been dieting too intensely or for too long, this balance can get thrown off for an extended period of time, which really, really sucks. That was one of the worst, most difficult things that I've ever experienced, because if I listened to my natural hunger and fullness signaling, I would have gained an excessive amount of weight. So instead of doing that, I ignored it. I sat in my hunger and I allowed it to worsen and worsen, and that led to the symptoms which I described, most primarily bad body image, restrictive eating, and terrible mood swings. It had problems that affected my relationships as well as my mental health. So that was not worth sustaining for me. That is a big enough reason for anyone to bulk. So if you are going through any of those things as a result of excessive leanness, and I'm not talking dieting, you're not feeling this way because you're currently dieting, but feeling this way because you are so low body fat. I'll throw another picture up of how lean I was at this time. You need to gain weight. Bulking should be done out of necessity rather than some, pipe dream of escaping victim weight. this also fits the scenario that I described of starting from a very lean body composition. You don't want to start bulking if you're not very lean already. However, I was. So this bulk lasted around 5 months officially, but it was closer to 8 or 9 months if you include the time between me embarking on this extremely restrictive crash diet and actually deciding to commit to a bulk. I was planning to commit to another diet only a couple of weeks after the original one because I noticed some initial increases in water retention that made me feel that I was gaining too much fat and I needed to lose it again. I was planning to get to close to stage leanness of between 6 and 8% body fat to then start bulking. But that would have been a terrible idea because I had already screwed up my hunger and my hormones. There were other hormonal issues that I can cover in the future that were much worse. But it was very important that I chose to start bulking. I did bulk too hard. So I found myself not gaining weight super quickly at the beginning. For the first 3.5 or 4 months, I gained weight really gradually. I was progressing consistently. The visual changes were still really good. I wasn't disimproving by any stretch because of the fat gain. I was gaining a minimal amount of body fat, and there was even some instances of recomposition. Now, this could also be that I was coming off of an injury when I decided to commit to this bulk, so I could have potentially gained a little bit of body fat and lost a little bit of muscle, so returning to training could have yielded some recomposition anyway. However, I think that some of it is due to the increase in food allowing me to train harder and ramp up thyroid function, and your thyroid obviously controls your metabolic function. So my metabolism increased significantly, which could have allowed me to lose body fat and gain muscle at the same time. However, by month 3.5 or month 4, I decided that the changes weren't happening fast enough. Rookie mistake, as described earlier. Muscle gain is slow. Fat gain is really fast. So I gained the majority of the fat that I gained through that bulk in the last month of the bulk. I think I gained close to 8 or 10 pounds, which is a lot for me. My frame is small. I'm 5'2", and I was, 110 pounds going into it. So that's 8 or 9% of my body weight gained in a month and a half after already lifting consistently for around 3 years. I would use that as a cautionary tale. Do not attempt to expedite the process of gaining muscle by adding more food. That is the primary takeaway of this video. So bulking isn't vaulted. People keep saying that. I see it everywhere. I think TNF started it. Bulking is vaulted. You just need to make sure that you're bulking for the right reasons. Psychological reasons are completely valid, as I described. So if you need to bulk because you've been maintaining excessive leanness and it's screwing up your body image or your hunger, those are great reasons to bulk. If you want to bulk because you're not getting big fast enough, you're probably going to get big, but not for the right reasons. I'm going to make another video comparing the differences between my first and second bulking phases. My first bulking phase was pretty typical, but my second one was more of a very lean bulk. I appreciate you giving me the time of day, and I hope that you learned something from this. Do not rush into your bulks. Mwah.